Okay, here we are. Another beautiful day at Holden. I know I come here a lot, but this is my go-to place, especially during the week. It's close, and I can come here fairly quickly and go for a walk before I have to go to work. So that's what I'm doing. And it's not as early as I had hoped. Just took a break from working to come out and take this video. There's some school kids here today, as you can see by the buses. I saw them on my way in. Great place. Looks like Perry local schools today. 3 bus loads, which is pretty awesome, because just to have the kids come here and you know, this, like I said, it's like a Garden of Eden almost. I mean, it's a beautiful place. And just starting young to educate children on nature and what's real in this modern age, I think, is so important. And having a place like this is a true natural resource. So it's just a wonderful thing. So another thing I started doing in the channel was posting videos of, or linking to videos of or about Jiddu Krishnamurti, since in all honesty, a lot of what I'm talking about comes from, mostly from, what I've learned by inquiring along with him, not from him. This is what's important, because, you know, he's not a teacher conveying knowledge. He's someone you walk with and learn with about yourself, not by taking what he says as truth, but by inquiring along with him, which is always what he's encouraging in all of his videos. You know, he brings up things, talks about things, but what he's really doing is, and I hate to say encourage, because it's not encourage, he's demonstrating, he's inquiring. And if you pay attention to his inquiry, then you have your own inquiry into these things, and you ask yourself, are these things that he says true? Can I see these things directly? And this is what's different that I found with listening to his stuff than anything else, because there's nothing to memorize, there's nothing to know. It's a freedom, right? It's, if anything, it's just learning to become free, dropping things away rather than adding things. And that freedom allows one to learn directly, not through the transfer of knowledge, but to learn directly through your own senses, to become sensitive to what's actually happening around you and in you and within you. Become sensitive to that, because that's all that is required. If I hate to say a requirement, but it is a requirement to be aware, to have awareness without choice, attention, to pay attention to what's happening. And you can't do that if your mind is occupied with the thoughts of yourself or the thoughts that others have imposed upon you in the form of truth, belief, or other so-called truth, you know, belief, whatever traditions or knowledge people try to impress upon you. And boy, that's just what everyone does, right? Whether it's, you know, people always want to impose upon another person what they believe in. It's a very common pattern. In some sense, I think it helps them justify their own belief. I think a lot of times when I see people that believe things like that, very strongly or not so strongly, there's always some doubt, you know, in their mind, whether they admit it or not, that what they believe is true. But the more people that believe it, it gives them like a sense of, well, it must be true. Look how many people believe it. 1/4 of the world's population. Well, that means it's true. Well, no, it certainly doesn't. It just means delusion is a very common pattern that can be repeated. So the number of people that believe in something certainly does not give credence to that belief. So just number one, throw that out. But that's authority again, because we think authority is also how many people believe something is a form of authority, right? Like if you were to pick religions based off just how many people in the world, belong to a certain religion, and you picked the one on the top, like it was an Amazon review or something, and just said, well, I'm going to believe what most people believe because, well, that must be right. No, it's not the right way. But anyways, just to get back to what is different about Jiddu Krishnamurti, and I often think actually about something Jesus said himself, where he said the path, I'm going to get this wrong, right? But the path to, I think it was hell, is wide open. But the path to get into the kingdom of heaven is like threading the head of a needle. And what's interesting about that is the very religion that says that, right, that those words, which I think are actually very wise, so yeah, he said that. But to really understand that, then you should question yourself, right? Are you on that wide path to disorder, or are you threading, threading the needle with a camel or something? I mean, it was something even more dramatic than that. Basically, nearly impossible, right? And I don't think a lot of people think about that. Well, if it was nearly impossible, how could we have so many, say, Christians in the world, right? That would seem to contradict Jesus' own message, that in a sense, it should make one question, right, whether one's on the right track or not, just by that statement alone. And then what does that tell you, right? It tells you that forget the numbers, forget what most people have told you, forget what your parents have raised you as, forget whatever, just forget all that. It doesn't matter. Just drop it all. Drop all the beliefs, drop everything. It's scary though, right? Because you want to hold on to something. But it's actually not so scary, because what happens? What's the result of that? What is not that it's there, what is it? Maybe there's a freedom that you've never known or understood because you've always been trapped in one system or another. But this is what's so unique about what I find with Jiddu Krishnamurti, because he's sort of giving you permission to drop all that, right? And not many people do. And in that sense, he's serving as a little bit of an authority figure to say, my teaching is to have no teaching, right? Or my teaching is to inquire for yourself, not assume authority, including him. He's very clear about it. But you could still take him as the authority. And this is one of the reasons why I didn't mention him that much, only here in passing, because I don't want to say that, well, this is, just another guru, just another teacher. Because that's not what this is. It's about figuring things out for yourself, truly. But it just so happens that there was this man who traveled the world and has a very interesting life. And there's different biographies that have been written about him, different books that have been written by people very close to him, like Mary Zimbalist and Scott Forbes and other things. So there's no denying he existed. He did some amazing things. He founded schools around the world. One's in Ojai, the Oak Grove School, which ideally, one day, maybe in my retirement or sooner rather than later, I would like to be a teacher, at that school. And that's something that I've been considering, because, that may be a transition that might be in my future, but I don't know. I'm not making that decision. In some sense, I just need it to be absolutely clear to me that that's what I should be doing. But that's a topic for another day. A lot that could be said about education and how do we improve education, and what's really being done now in our schools is not even education. It's just like filling heads full of facts not really teaching kids to inquire on their own. You know, I won't go down that path. Then this will be a lecture on education, but that's a whole nother topic, right, that we could talk about. What is education? In fact, I mean, Krishnamurti wrote a book called The Significance of Education that I would highly recommend anyone, and many other books on education, in addition to founding his schools. So what I think is just I'm gonna take, I don't want to disturb the kids over there in the lecture, whatever they're learning about nature. I really wanted to talk the word. So, okay, I talked about videos, and I am posting links to certain videos by, there's a YouTube channel called The Immeasurable, which are short, the words of Krishnamurti, some really meaningful words, put to music, put to, you know, to a video, so there's some backdrop to it. And I think that's, those are really cool videos, and I think, very busy day today here, I'm trying to achieve some solitude, so we can talk without, you know, without me interrupting other people or having them interrupt us, which is actually what I wanted to talk about today. Loneliness, being alone, solitude, because those are not all the same thing. It's worth talking about, because it's very important. But before that, I just did want to mention that all these videos, that if you were to search for Krishnamurti on YouTube, you will find videos by, you know, the Krishnamurti Foundation of America. But this Immeasurable YouTube channel is very cool because it also, it's sort of like little short vignettes or whatever, short little videos that, you know, can tease you into it, but it's not sufficient, right? That's not inquiry. It's sort of just lets you know a little bit about what he said, which you may find interesting, and then say, well, I would like to learn more. And of course you can learn some by listening, but also mostly by your own inquiring. And every day I come here, see, this is what I do, you know, with myself, which is why I was going to talk about alone, because being alone is not a scary thing. And I think a lot of people are afraid of being alone because, well, for a lot of reasons. Some people equate being alone with loneliness, and it's really not. You know, loneliness, but it's important to go into loneliness, because I think just about every person has experienced loneliness at some point in their life. And then to go into what is loneliness, what does that mean, and how is that different from being alone? And I would say another word is isolation. All these words can mean different things. Like some people, some monks, sannyasis in India, even monks in the Christian tradition, whatever it is, choose to isolate themselves from everybody in the world, go to a cave at the top of the Himalaya mountains, find some isolated place and spend their life just in solitude. You can't argue that they're not with themselves, right, in one way or the other, but what are they doing and why are they doing that? And isolation, separating yourself from the world, first, is an illusion. You're never separated. Even if you find a cave somewhere that's nice and quiet, you're surrounded by nature. You can't, this goes back to what we talked about in the previous video about relationship. You always have a relationship with the world. You just may change the nature of the relationship from one with human beings to one without human beings, but you wouldn't survive if you weren't intimately related to nature. So you can't escape that. You can't isolate yourself in some way, right? So you can isolate yourself from other humans. That's true. But not from everything. And what you do is your own, what you do what you want, but that's not really, and I guess suppose people do that because they're looking for something, right? Or, maybe they're not. Maybe they just want to get away from society and they're just tired of it. But it's a reaction, right? Then it's a reaction against society. Reacting against society, wanting to be away from it, is almost just as bad as being fully immersed in society without any awareness of why you're there. Rather than sort of changing your environment in that way, just become aware of everything around you, regardless of where you are, whether you're in a cave or, in the suburbs, or living in the middle of the city in a small apartment, surrounded by noise, traffic, and people. Be aware of what's going on, wherever you are. So isolation can be dangerous, though, in the sense that you're seeking something and you want it to come in that way. But again, that's a choice in that sense. But I think what's important is to talk about loneliness is the other side of things, right? Where maybe that person living in the cave is still lonely, right? I mean, maybe they miss human companionship, and even though they're in conflict, right? Because to make a choice like that, to move away from all people, it puts you in a sense of conflict, because everyone had a mother, right? Everyone has had contact with a human being at some point in your life. So to then say I don't want that contact anymore is sets you up for conflict, because it's different than where you were before. And so then loneliness, right? Let's get to loneliness. Everyone knows what it feels like to be lonely. Everyone's been lonely at some point in their life. And that feeling of emptiness, of wanting to belong but not belonging, wanting companionship, someone to talk to, someone just so that you're not, just by yourself. And it can create a longing, for something other than what is. You want things to be different. You're not okay with being alone, right? Maybe you're alone in some sense. Maybe you don't have a lot of friends or a lot of social contact, but it saddens you, right? You're suffering. Loneliness is like a suffering that comes from being alone, but you don't have to suffer by being alone. Being alone is something else entirely different. And when you go into loneliness, which you should on your own, what does it mean to be lonely, and when does it happen? Loneliness in a lot of ways is a self-centeredness, right? You want something you're not getting. You want something through human interaction to fulfill a need, whatever that need may be. It could be just a need for companionship, or it could be a sexual need. It could be just an intellectual need, emotional need, whatever it is. But you want another person to fulfill something that's empty in yourself, and that is a self-centeredness. So that sense of loneliness, we may not think about it, but if you go into it, is really an expression of self-centeredness. Why should being alone cause you suffering? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with being alone? And it's the most natural thing, though. So people, everyone needs somebody. Well, it's not the right way to look at it. Humans interact, right? But how we choose to interact can make all the difference. And interacting out of a need for someone, right? What do they call that? It's sort of a codependency, right? The word that we use often. And you can be in a codependent relationship where each person needs the other person to fulfill some need that they have, and that passes for a relationship. Well, it's not the right way to say, I need something and that's why I'm with you, and you need something and that's why you're with me. Let's tie the knot, call it a day. And that is a dangerous form of relationship, because if this person doesn't fulfill your need anymore, somehow they change or whatever, now you don't like that person anymore because they're not fulfilling your need. Which also then goes back to love and what it really is love, because you may think you're in a loving relationship, but if it depends on that other person doing things for you probably aren't. You're probably in a codependent relationship. And I don't want to get stuck using these words, but the point being, one can be aware and should be aware of, why is someone related to someone, or what is the nature of your relationships with other people. And if that relationship is driven by fulfilling a need, a desire, then it may not be so wholesome. And you may not be alone, but you may still be lonely. You can be lonely even when you're surrounded by people, if they're not fulfilling your needs, right? You have certain needs for we said intellectual, emotional, physical, maybe financial. Maybe you're with somebody purely out of financial considerations. So I think loneliness is something, you can be surrounded by people and be lonely. That's another thing to be aware of. So loneliness is a feeling that doesn't even require you being alone. And I think if you go into it, it is from this sense of self. So to go back to what we talked about in previous talks, I guess calling these talks or whatever they are, walks and talks, just seeing that, this loneliness in that perspective of the self, and what is the self. So we get back to that, right? Everything sometimes comes full circle, and I'm not going to go into that at the moment. But this sense of self that we have, that we are an individual that is separate from everybody else, that has individual needs and individual desires to be fulfilled, seeks rewards, avoids punishments. The very definition of self-centeredness, right? That is the definition of it. One who seeks rewards and punishments, like for yourself, not thinking of other people in that regard, not thinking of the whole, focusing on the part that you are and not the whole. So is it possible to be alone but not lonely, which is kind of where we're headed here. And to be alone, probably in its purest form, just means to be not with other people. But it also, if you break that word apart, it means all one. All one. In fact, maybe the origin of the word. I don't know for sure. So in some sense, to be alone, the word itself almost can be the opposite of alone. All one. If you're all one, you're not separate. You're not separate from everybody else, regardless of distance. Right? Like, why? I may not see anybody right now. Sure looks like I'm alone. But there's people over there. There's people that I live with. I have family, people, friends. So alone is not just the proximity of you and other people. Alone, but it sort of is, in some sense, if you're okay with being alone. And being alone, I guess, being in this, not always being in communication with people. But you don't feel separate. You're not withdrawing from society. It's not a reaction to society and saying, I don't want to be part of this society anymore. Alone is like now, coming out for a walk by myself. For a while, I'm alone, in the sense of there's no one around. It does allow me to speak in a certain way that I wouldn't be able to do if I was surrounded by people and noise. And there's an advantage to that. But, you know, if I was alone all the time, right, deliberately alone, then I'm in isolation. And if I'm alone out of choice, you know, I don't want to be around people because they bother me or disturb me, right, then I'm also reacting to that. And so really, alone, if you go into it, is not maybe a different word than what we conceive of it as. Looking at it as all one could be the ending of self-centeredness. And to be okay with being alone, walking through a park by oneself, not always needing another person there by your side, to just be okay with being by yourself. In some sense, you're all one. You know, you're not separate from society, but you're also not reacting to it or being driven by society. You know, to live in this world but not of this world. And in that sense, aloneness has energy, because aloneness can also mean being alone, being free from the influences of society and the conditioning that society wants or imposes upon you, you know, to be and act a certain way. And to be alone, in some sense, is to be free of that conditioning, to not be driven by what society deems is good or bad, or correct or incorrect, or the social pressure that's put upon us, whether that's through the physical world or through the digital social media world that we live in today. Alone is to be free. And to be free is, we talked about this before, brings about a different way of living, one with love and compassion for all. And again, all one. When you have love and compassion for all, you're not against anyone, you're not for anyone, you're not taking any particular action to achieve an end. It is a sense of being one. It's a sense of being the whole, not the part. And in that sense, when you're the whole, you don't think about being generous or loving or compassion. That comes about when you still see yourself as an individual and you believe you need to take action to be loving, take action to be compassionate. You're still stoking that ego of self-centeredness because it feels good to help other people. Right? And that feeling good is a reward. To act in that way, so-called lovingly or compassionate, to achieve an award, even of self-satisfaction, of being a do-gooder, you know, to bring that word up again. This is why, you know, doing good can be, you know, shouldn't be looked upon as the ultimate aim, so-called good, right? Because it's often driven by self-satisfaction, achieving something. You want to be known as a good person, or you want to be known as a person who helps other people. Then you have a reputation of being a good person. And to do that, you may be helping people in some sense, but you're hurting people in the other sense, because you're contributing to the disorder of society. Because anything that contributes towards the self and self-centeredness is contributing to the disorder of society. So helping in that way is actually hurting. So instead of like consciously driving yourself to do good, if you are selfless, you naturally do good things. You don't strive to do good things. You don't try to organize or form a society or do whatever. It's just in your daily interactions and in your interactions with everybody, good things happen. Not that you cause good things to happen. It's just you become maybe a source, a fountain of goodness in some sense, that isn't acting to be good, doesn't care about being recognized as being good, but some sort of goodness may emanate from that is not intentional or to achieve anything. So to be alone is to be okay with yourself, to be comfortable whether you're around people, whether you're not people. It's all the same. There's no difference. And I don't You don't desire to be with people because you feel a pit in your stomach when you're not with people. Very often I see people here with somebody else, and I rarely see people alone by themselves. Let's say by themselves. I often come here by myself. My family, other people, they have other things to do. I don't do this, to be with people or to be without people. I enjoy it, and it's a very important time to me. But I mostly come here by myself, and it doesn't bother me that I do. But when I see other people like always with somebody, I think, are you okay to be by yourself? Because maybe you're not, and that's why you always have to be with somebody. And then very often when they're with that person, they're talking endlessly, like I am now. So that goes against this. But like I said before, what I'm doing now is different than how I normally do. I normally don't talk to anybody. I just walk and observe. And but I'm doing this sort of to explain or point out the value, maybe, and not even the value, just what I do. Bring awareness to what I do, so that if somebody sees usefulness in it, they can do it too, or do something else. There's no requirement to do anything here. I'm just out enjoying nature, and I think it's not just I don't come here as a deliberate reaction to get away from the world. Partly, I would say, to be honest. I mean, I like the feeling of being here surrounded by birds and trees and nature. I mean, it's enjoyable. There's no doubt about that. But when I leave, I leave and go back and do whatever else I have to do in my life. And then I come here the next day or in the evening. But it's not something that I have to be here. Because the world is a big place and we have a lot of things to do. And one of them is walking through the woods, but it's not the only thing we do. It shouldn't be our only action. So alone, to be okay with being alone is a very powerful thing, and there's an energy from that, because you can listen too, right? You can't listen to someone if you're talking at the same time, right? If someone's trying to communicate something to you and you're talking at the same time, how can you possibly be listening to that person? So a mind that is always chattering cannot listen to anything. And if the mind is always chattering about one thing or the other, then how can you learn? And so when the mind is quiet, it can receive, in that sense, right? Whatever there is, not anything in particular. It is capable of paying attention or being aware, and aware of what's happening now, not what happened yesterday or 10 minutes ago or this morning or what's going to happen later. Those are all thoughts that are not what's happening now. So here's a nice little sign for Corning Lake, which is the lake we've gone around many, many times. Sometimes what's amazing is what comes to you in a state of quietness when you have no intention and you don't desire to achieve anything, and you're just paying attention and aware. Things happen in that awareness. Not things that you control or cause, but things happen. And you're now aware of it. You can now be aware of the new things that are happening, right? Not the old things. Memories and thoughts are the past. They're old, they're dead. Memories are dead things. And they can hurt you. In some sense, they are the ghosts or the demons. The past is like that. Whereas just being aware of what's happening now, today, here, in this moment, fully, without comparing it to the past or trying to be any different, that's new. that is life. Like, life is what's happening now, not what happened yesterday. It's life is now. Yesterday is just a memory. So you have to be alone sometimes to be able to receive that, to be away from, if you're with somebody chattering all the time, you're not going to pay attention to anything other than the chattering. So there's a power in aloneness in that way, that to be alone is to be free, not because you don't like the companionship of other people, but because the mind can be silent in that freedom. Not because you make it silent. You can't control your mind and make it silent. I mean, that's almost absurd, because who's controlling it? Who is the entity that is bringing about silence? That very entity is thought, which is the very thing you're trying to silence. So how can thought silence thought? Can't. So you can't, this is why you can't follow a process to become silent. No form of meditation that involves an active controller, which is any process, any method, requires control. And one part of the brain is trying to silence another part of the brain, which it may do. But now you have that other part of the brain that silenced that brain is still thought, still there. You can't end thought with another thought. Thought doesn't end through any action or deliberate action. Silence and the chattering of the mind, the ending of the chattering of the mind, can never come about through any process. Because any process is driven by thought. I mean, isn't it logical? Thought is a process. It requires thought to have any process. It comes from knowledge. Any process comes from knowledge. So whether it's Buddhist meditation or Hindu meditation or Christian prayer, whatever you pick, your pick, the thousands of ways people have devised through cunning and thought to silence the mind are not truly silencing the mind. They may give the appearance or the illusion of silencing it, but it's putting yourself in a trance, a hypnosis, even if that happens. Right? It's you're just achieving whatever you ended up. It's not that something will happen, but it's not silence, and it's not a silence that comes through wisdom and understanding, which is true silence comes from understanding and wisdom. It can't be separated from. It's not just taking a drug. You can take a drug and stop the functioning of your brain, and there's many drugs that do that. And that's why none of this is about deadening the brain. It's about the brain being fully alive. Not inactive, but fully active. In its full, complete state. Holistic action. Not partial action. It's the opposite of what everyone's trying to do, in a sense. It's not to be asleep, to be unaware of what's happening. It's to be fully aware. And what's so crazy is that the world, humanity has taken this wrong path, if you want to say, and everyone's gotten fooled into thinking that the path to peace, as if there is a path to peace, is through these methods, right? And I think this is what appeals to people that come from the West, like myself, who grew up in a Christian tradition where everything was about knowledge passed on down through, knowledge coming from a book, a source of truth that is seen, the book is seen as a source of truth, or the church and its, passing on from one priest to the next, to the next, to the next, this ancestry, so to speak, of, teaching from master to student, from master, who then becomes the master and passes on to the next student. That's also true in Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, and in the Hindu tradition, this continuity of knowledge that gets passed on. None of that. Wisdom is not from books or from knowledge of any kind. Wisdom is being aware of, fully and wholly aware of what's happening right now. And there's nothing else. And in that wisdom, in that full awareness, there is a silence, a quieting that occurs. That it's not something that you do. So being aware again brings about wisdom. Paying full attention, your whole body, mind, all your senses to what's happening now. There's nothing closer to the truth than that. And from that, everything flows. Not through any activity of the mind, of the brain. Not through any knowledge that you've acquired. But this awareness is in itself acting. But not you, as a self-entity, are acting. That is motive. That is direction. That's often driven by your self-interest, not true love and compassion and wisdom of the universe. So just to get back, aloneness is this important. To be alone is to allow that to happen. Not you make it happen, but to allow that to happen. And not that those are even the conditions, because if you get into the thing of, okay, now that's a process. I need to make myself alone in order to achieve something. See, if it becomes that, you're back in the same old game. So it's really difficult to get out of thought, because thought is always going to come in, sneak in through the back door, or come down the chimney. Ego, which is this image we build up about ourselves that has self-preservation at its very core. I mean, the ego is self-preservation, and in fact survival, right? Survival of the individual organism is how the ego has arisen. And that's a very powerful force, right? That can't just be, it's not going to just give up just because, it's going to hold on to its existence. And so it'll say, yes, okay, you want to achieve this state of transcendent, bliss. Okay, I'll tell you how. So the ego stays alive by offering you these processes and methods to follow to achieve a state of selflessness, which makes no sense. The self can't end the self. It's not possible. So anyways, alone, to try and bring this back, right? Alone is a very powerful thing. Being alone there's an energy to being alone. It's not loneliness. It's not isolation. And I think, it is what it is in some sense, right? It is that. It is this. And nothing else. Okay, so I guess I don't know, I feel like I've rambled on quite a while. Again, the words just come from wherever, and especially being out in all this beautiful nature, it's like I don't have any intention, I just want to express, I guess. Like there's almost a natural expression of, when you're in a very peaceful state, very just surrounded by beauty, it's like the beauty speaks. That something bigger than you speaks and can give energy to words. Truth can use knowledge, but it can't go the other way around. Knowledge can never achieve truth. But knowledge, being a useful tool, as we've discussed many times, if you have, or if there is, truth, love, compassion, that state, if you want to call it a state or whatever it is, knowledge can be useful in that end, but not as the beginning. It's a limited, useful tool like anything else. But should not be completely rejected, right? I mean, you can't reject knowledge either, because that's not what this is about. It's putting everything in its proper place. And even being alone on my walks, whatever you want to call this, call it alone, call it not alone, call it all one. It's not lonely. I feel more whole here, more all one than any other place, because the mind is quieted from its constant chattering. And there's nothing lonely about that. It's only if I start thinking about the things of myself that loneliness creeps in. So, okay, I really don't know how long that was. Let's see, 45 minutes, not too bad. All right, until next time, have a good day, and don't be afraid to be alone.